Hello again, horror lovers. Today, we'll be traveling to Latin America to talk about one of the most horrible events that has ever taken place there in the last 10 years. That day, Mel was running late for work. It was the fourth time she had overslept, and the previous day she had been warned that she would be fired if this happened again. Thus, she was driving to work so fast she couldn't evade a truck going towards her. She woke up in the hospital 2 hours later, with her arm in a plaster and her head and thorax bandaged. And just when she was starting to realize where she was, a nurse went into the room where 5 more hospitalized patients were resting. The nurse was bringing everyone their lunch, but when she gave Mel hers, their gazes clashed for a couple of seconds, enough for Mel to feel shivers go down her entire body. Then the young nurse ordered Mel to give her her phone, arguing that it was forbidden to have it there for security reasons. Mel wasn't completely convinced, but ended up doing what the nurse demanded. Time passed by and the visiting hours were finally on. However, Mel found it strange that all the patients were receiving visits from their loved ones, except her. And so Mel asked for permission to call her family and check if anything had happened to them, but the nurse denied her request. Nighttime came, and due to how worried she was, Mel couldn't sleep. It was 3 a.m. when suddenly, from the darkness, she saw someone enter the room and stand right before one of the beds. "Where are you taking me?" The response was, "We are going for a little ride." She instantly recognized the voice of that nurse who had scared her so much and saw how that figure took the patient out of the room. The next day, one of the beds in the room was still missing. Mel didn't dare to ask about it, but she knew that what she saw the previous night was not normal. That day, nobody came to visit her either, and the staff then gave her the news that she would have to spend at least 48 extra hours hospitalized in there. She started to have a really bad feeling about the whole thing. But despite how worried Mel was, the next night she finally fell asleep due to lack of sleep. However, when she woke up, yet another one of the beds went missing, and she knew that that patient had not been released yet. Mel then decided to ask the nurse, since she was starting to get suspicious about that hospital and thought that maybe she was going crazy. He passed away last night because of a heart attack." Mel didn't believe her, and so she devised a plan. Mel waited until lunchtime, waiting for the staff to be at the cafeteria. She then made sure nobody was around, went to the storage unit of that floor, and got her phone back. Mel then called her mother to tell her about what happened, and she told Mel that the staff at the hospital were not allowing her to see Mel. And so Mel prepared herself. She would break out of the hospital that very night, but not before finding out what was really going on. She waited for the nurse to come back to take away another patient, and she carefully followed them. She then saw how the nurse sedated the patient before bringing him into an operating room. There was a surgeon waiting inside, and then both the surgeon and the nurse grabbed 2 enormous saws to dismember that man. They then extracted his heart, liver, and kidneys and placed them in a box. That's when the nurse turned around and saw horrified Mel looking behind the glass. The nurse simply smiled at Mel while covered in blood. "You are next." Mel rushed out of the hospital and called the police once she considered she was safe. This fateful event resulted in a huge public scandal, and both the nurse and the surgeon were arrested. The two declared that they weren't the only ones dedicated to such monstrous activities, that a huge organ trafficking network existed and that it could never be stopped. The Loaiza Archbishop Hospital in Peru is haunted by a terrifying legend. Many patients claim to have seen a headless nurse wandering around the hospital's halls in the wee hours of the night. You think it might be real, or is it just the patient's imagination? Either way, today we'll share with you this story filled with dark mysteries. It was the 50s when a nurse and a young doctor were about to get married. They both worked at the Loaiza Archbishop Hospital, and just a few days before the wedding, the doctor had to travel. But unfortunately, there was a terrible accident and he lost his life during his trip. When the nurse heard the news, she was completely shocked. She couldn't understand how it was possible that all of her happiness had been stripped away from her in mere seconds. She had her dream job, a man who loved and respected her, and a bright future. However, after those tragic news, grief and depression completely overpowered her, and she decided to take her own life. Overwhelmed by grief, she jumped out of the window of the 3rd floor of the hospital. Some construction work was being done in the place at the time, and she fell on sharp spikes which decapitated her. And from that day on, many patients at the hospital started claiming to have seen a woman wandering around the corridors in the wee hours of the night. She would be seen wearing an old white uniform as well as a blue velvet cloak that nurses used to wear in the 50s. All the patients who claim to have seen her say that she never approaches them, so they have only seen her from afar. However, rumors say that an intern once tried to approach the woman, and when he did, he ended up frothing at the mouth and then vanished. The Loaiza Archbishop Hospital is still open to this day. And to alleviate the patients' fears, the nurses use a very different uniform from the ones used in the 50s. However, every now and then, some patients still claim to have seen a headless woman wearing a blue velvet cloak. Is the soul of that nurse still there? My name is Maria, and I'm a surgeon. You might be wondering if my entire life is consumed by my work, and lately I would say that you are right. My friends want to go on a trip with me? I have no time due to work. Or I want to have a significant other? I can't because I spend my entire day working. I'd love to be a mother, but I can't because I spend all of my time at work. However, despite all that, I'm glad to say that I do love my profession. I know that many people share that same sentiment, although that feeling of thinking to yourself, that person is alive thanks to me, well, it's very comforting. However, yeah, the price you have to pay for that is sometimes high. Countless hours of study, countless hours of work, and a huge lot of stress. Stress such as what I experienced on March the 8th. That excitement a medical professional feels when they save someone doesn't always happen. Sometimes you can give it your all, and despite your best efforts, lives can be lost at the operating room. That week, I had been working many more hours than usual. Many of my co-workers had contracted a stomach virus, and I had to take care of all the emergencies alone. Up to one point, I had spent 48 hours at the hospital without rest. I think my legs were moving on their own, and I had a massive headache. In that moment, 2 patients came from a traffic accident. A girl who had been run over and had bruises on her leg, and the one responsible for running over her. A middle-aged taxi driver with a few bruises and glass shards on his face. Both needed to go into the operating room immediately, but I simply could not operate on both at the same time. After a swift assessment, I decided to act quickly and operate on the girl first. The operation took longer than I had anticipated. She had a lot of broken and dislocated bones. However, the operation ended up being successful. This girl would be able to walk again in a few months. Then it was time to act quickly and operate on the taxi driver next. However, when I came out of the operating room, my co-workers told me he had died. The man not only had bruises on his face, he had put on his seatbelt incorrectly, resulting in many of his organs getting crushed during the accident. His situation was way more critical than the girl's. But my tiredness and doing things in a rush resulted in me assessing his condition wrongly. I decided to go home, and the hospital called substitute doctors to cover me for a few days. I was morally devastated for what happened at the hospital. Nothing like that had ever happened to me in the past. I had lost patients before, but never due to such a huge mistake. I blamed myself for that death. I blamed my damn tiredness and not being 100% clear-headed to make the right decisions. After 3 days of not working, I had to go back to my routine. I had to leave the weeping and lamentations behind, and there still was a lot more people who needed my help. I couldn't keep brooding over it. So, since I had the night shift, I decided to take a taxi. I didn't want to drive at those hours. "Where to, miss?" asked the taxi driver. "Take me to the ER of the Santa Clara Hospital, please." I looked at the taxi's rearview mirror, and a shiver went down my entire body. Through the mirror, I could see his lips saying, "I'm taking you to hell, miss, for leaving me to die."
How are you, horror lovers? Today we tell you the legend of Aurora Simons, an American woman who at the age of 30 became pregnant. At first she couldn't contain her joy. She was very excited to know that she would soon be a mother. However, a few weeks later she began to feel unwell and weak. She thought that it was normal, because the first months of the trimester could cause quite a bit of discomfort, but soon the situation became totally horrifying. It cost her a lot to confess it to her family, but she had no other option than to reveal that her baby was tormenting her. She claimed that the fetus spoke to her, caused her severe pain, and that she had threatened to take her life if she mentioned his existence. The family tried to reassure her by telling her that they were just imagining, the result of stress, exhaustion, and fear. The best thing she could do was stay calm, be relaxed, and wait for the months to pass, because each time the discomfort would get less. Aurora reproached them for no one believing her. Every day she was more scared and desperate. She was screaming for help, to get that baby out of her, that he was causing her unbearable pain. After speaking with psychologists who diagnosed that her mind was playing tricks on her, the woman continued to affirm that she felt that she was dying, because this pain wasn't normal. So her family decided to take her to a hospital to check and see if the child was okay. Unfortunately, Aurora lost her life on the way, a little before reaching the center. Doctors tried to revive her, but both she and the baby had died. After several tests, they discovered that all of Aurora's organs were chewed up, as if a rat was gnawing each of them to pieces. That woman had spent weeks imploring them to remove that devil from her insides, which consumed her, threatened her, and tortured her. The doctors refused to believe all those statements, but they found no explanation for the supernatural event. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more horror videos, subscribe to our channel.